Hi, I'm Nick with the ManageEngine Insights podcast, and we're here for another conversation with various experts in the field. And today we're joined by Joseph Steinberg. Joseph Steinberg, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And Joseph is one of only 28 people worldwide to hold a suite of advanced information security certificates. That's true. Which certificates are those?
That would be the ISE squared set of CISSP, CISSP, ISSAP, ISSMP, and CSSLP. And essentially what those initials refer to are advanced certifications in security architecture and security management and secure software development.
Nice. And
So
that
deep and broad.
yeah, I mean that is joined by nearly 2 decades of leadership experience in the information security industry, and you've literally written the book on information security. That's Cybersecurity for Dummies, right? Is that the
I
title?
That is correct. And little shameless plug, the second edition of the book literally just came out days ago and is available. You can go to my website and you'll see it. So it's a great book for people who are looking for an intro. Obviously, if you're already a sophisticated security person, there may be other books that you may be more interested in, but we all know people who could use that little intro, as we call it.
Yeah, it can help. It's a study guide for CISOs to become certified, right?
Well, that's a separate book.
Oh,
The chief
okay.
information security officers, yeah, they better not be dummies when it comes to cyber. Otherwise,
That's a
we're in
good point.
trouble.
That's a good point.
So those
I
are the
think I was
opposite ends of the
mixing.
spectrum. Although, to be fair, there are people today who probably know very little about cyber and are younger, who in the future will be CISOs, because there is, great opportunity in the field. And if you're thinking about it, the book talks about different jobs that could exist, and uh, it's really a great field to get into.
Great. So with that said, I think I wanted to get started by talking about kind of a general approach for enterprises, whether um, your suggestion is to do more of a top-down leadership led and have it be more of policy and enforcement, or if your suggestion with larger enterprises, if it's better to do kind of a user by user basis, focus on education and engagement, and have people more self-reliant as far as their cybersecurity efforts, because there's plenty to worry about, but it's hard for everyone to approach cybersecurity. So what's your general approach for enterprises?
Well, I'll start by saying that if there was a magic approach that always worked, we wouldn't see breaches at large enterprises in the news every day. So let's start with the fact that there is no, magic potion or magic solution to this. Cybersecurity is hard and it's complex. And one of the reasons that it is hard and complex is that if you're trying to protect data and infrastructure, you need to protect it all the time. You need to fend off 100% of attacks or as close to that as possible, whereas the attackers only need to get through once. So the odds are always against you. Uh, and the reality is it costs almost nothing to launch a cyber attack. So unlike military attacks where, firing a cruise missile can cost $750,000, even if you have the capability to have that missile in the training, cyber attacks cost almost nothing to launch. So there's an endless supply of attacks and you're going to be constantly hit with them. So there's that unbalance makes it hard and complicated. The two things that you mentioned, the top down as well as the user approach, those are both significant, and you can't have one without the other. You're not going to be able to get users to take cybersecurity seriously if your executives don't take it seriously. I mean, if people see that management doesn't care, they're not going to care more. So clearly, top down is important. And top down is especially important in convincing people to internalize that cybersecurity is important. If people don't really believe that it's important, if they don't believe that they're targets, their behavior is just different, right? People who think that their data is at risk and that they may be targeted consciously or subconsciously or both act differently than people who don't believe that. And it is management's responsibility to make that attitude of hey, we are targets, we need to be careful, prevalent throughout the organization. Users, though, are also the Achilles heel of cybersecurity. Think about how much technology has advanced in the last 25 years. I mean, the first firewalls that I saw, in my career, which were very, very early firewalls, you had to log into the firewall in order to go through it. It was, these were not seamless technologies. And there was one person running the firewall for major international banks. I mean, we're talking about tremendous changes in technology, right? The early versions of these things don't even look like toys compared to what we have now. But the human brain is the same human brain as 25 years ago. It's the same human brain as 2,500 years ago. So whereas technologies advance rapidly and our security capabilities, both defensive and attacking, offensive, improve, dramatically in short periods of time, that human brain does not. And a lot of the attacks today, if not the vast majority of successful attacks, exploit that. There'll be some sort of social engineering component that exploits the human tendency to make mistakes, to trust people that should not be trusted, etc. And that is not going to change because technology will continue to improve at rapid speed, and human brain is not going to evolve major changes, for many, many generations. It takes a long period of time. And so you need both. You need the top-down commitment to cybersecurity, commitment to budgeting for cybersecurity, to get appropriate, risk assessments, to get appropriate technologies and countermeasures into place, to get appropriate management tools into place, to get appropriate attitude into place. But you also need to make sure that the users are capable and understand these things and are less prone to make mistakes. And that if they do make mistakes, there are systems in place to prevent those mistakes from becoming cybersecurity catastrophes.
And with that is with the lack of major change coming, I guess, from like a physiological or biological stance, do you see kind of like a social element being the defining factor? I mean, you're talking about that as far as like the culture of the company itself, but do you see like a generational divide? Is that like a just the way people of different major age groups is there kind of just this divide between different ages? Is there an approach you would take that kind of regardless of experience approaches different generations in different ways?
That's an amazing question, because it's something that I think many doctoral dissertations will be written on in upcoming years. We have very different attitudes towards security and privacy, not just across age groups, but it varies among demographics, among socioeconomic groups, among people from different countries and different regions. There are many very, very different attitudes towards lots of things that happen online. And there is not necessarily a right and wrong. Um, and who decides what's right and wrong? And cultural norms also change. There are things that today Facebook or Twitter would remove and prohibit that 50 years ago in the same country, in the same cities, by the same people's grandparents, if they had written the opposite, would have been removed. Okay, there are many things that have changed culturally, even in the United States. Certainly when it comes to LGBTQ rights, when it comes to respecting people's chosen genders, things like that, dramatic change even in the United States. Never mind overseas and other countries. And other cultures have very different attitudes. When it comes to security and privacy, similar things exist. The generation that's growing up now is used to the fact that their parents shared pictures of them with the whole world since the day they're born. That's going to have sociological impacts. When these kids get older, it's going to be very different than, let's say, my generation or my parents' generation, where you don't find your baby pictures online and your entire life story documented for the world. And whether that's good or not that it's been done, it has been done. So there are many, many things that have culturally changed. Some of them have tremendous security impacts down the line that we haven't even thought about. Okay, the person who's going to be president of the United States of America in 40 years, the people who will be on the Supreme Court in 40 years, or 50 years, or 60 years, Congress people, leaders of other nations, the Secretary General of the UN. Right now, those people are oversharing on social media. Right now, those people's friends are oversharing on social media. That data is being collected. Will there be data out there that could be used to blackmail these people in the future? Hey, I know that you were selling drugs when you were in college. If you don't do this particular thing for my country, we're going to release this and you're not going to be elected or you're going to get impeached or whatever. There's so many possibilities, but we're entering a world that we don't know what the repercussions of a lot of this stuff that's online are and the attitudes towards it. Maybe the attitudes will change towards these things culturally and no one will care. The fact that, hey, everybody did things wrong when they were kids. It doesn't matter if it's online. I don't know, but nobody knows. So we really don't know the impact. And I think dissertations will be written about that, how different cultures, different age groups, different societies adjust to the changes that online data, that big data, that privacy, have brought as they have changed.
Thank you for that answer. And with the you mentioned dissertations and the academic side. I hadn't really thought about, because normally I'm in the space of like the business side of cybersecurity and IT management, things like that. Is that a growing field of knowledge, or is it kind of it's been kind of stable, or is it declining? Because I tend to not really have that on front of mind. Is that a viable field of inquiry in academics? Is that really
I
something
mean, I'm
that's
not an
supported?
academic, but I think all of these are going to be growing areas. The impact of technology on human society is only going to keep growing. Many of the things we can't anticipate, even in the business world, right? Just think about the impact that technology has had on people in terms of recruiting for jobs and applying for jobs. The entire process has totally changed. Written resumes, right? In-person first interviews, ads in the New York Times, job opening, with little print, 4 lines. It's all totally changed. How many people have found their jobs through connections, second level connections on LinkedIn, or been found by recruiters on LinkedIn? On the flip side, think about how much information is revealed by people about their employers on LinkedIn. Right? If someone wanted to figure out what technologies are being used by a particular company, if they connect to enough, engineers at that company, they have a pretty good idea. You talk about cybersecurity and knowledge of internal systems, that's a business issue. And it's the same issue as the oversharing on social media from a personal perspective. There's a lot more information out there. So what should remain private? What's reasonable to keep private? What has to stay secure? These things are changing. Likewise, when you think about the fact that people carry phones with them and they expect to be able to use them anywhere, including in their offices, right? That has a tremendous impact on the cybersecurity of businesses. You got to manage these devices that are inside that, by the way, have recording technology, have video technology, have phone technology, can be connected to vulnerable networks when they're not in the office. There's just so many new issues that have come up, and society is addressing them, but there's no uniform right way of doing it. The cybersecurity profession, for example, wants to keep these devices on isolated networks. They want there to be policies and technology to segregate various kinds of information on the device, a work area, etc. Not everybody's doing that. Some people are working from home also, or they're working from home part of the time, and things can be even more complicated. There's just, technology has complicated things because it's created an environment where we no longer have separate work and personal lives, and separate work and personal environments, and separate personal and work devices. And what that means is a lot more complexity for cyber. So I think all these societal issues, the societal changes, affect personal, they affect business, and they affect government. They affect everybody. And I think we only see the tip of the iceberg until after things happen. And that's one of the challenges of the cyber profession.
That tends to be the case, right? I mean, especially with like 0-day exploits and things like that. It's like yeah, it's been an issue and it could have been exploited for a long time. And just as far as whether or not we're aware of the exploitation is just a matter of time. It just unfolds and oops, it's something that could have or should have been fixed a while ago, whether it's in the code base or just security protocols. And it's, I guess, not always a matter of intelligence and having the actual like the knowledge of the issue, but it's also a matter of will and having the dedication to pursue the fixes, whatever they may be, either code wise or security wise. So your initial
I
point
think there's
about, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, I think there's an interesting area there also that expands on this, which is, if you're the government, for example, and you're, an intelligence agency and you discover a 0 day, right, a possible exploit that can be used. Do you use that to spy on your adversaries? Do you fix it in your own systems and tell your government agencies to fix it, but not fix it in the civilian population so you can continue to exploit it when needed to spy on others? Do you tell the world so that nobody can use it and you keep everybody safe, including yourself, but also disclosing it to your adversaries? I mean, there's so many complex issues that come up that we really have not had to deal with in the pre-technology field, in the pre-technology world. Look, I even wrote about, the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the fact that there were many volunteer hackers who were hacking Russian systems. And, my personal belief is that they were knowingly helping Putin far more than they were harming him, because if he's got vulnerabilities in systems and you're using those vulnerabilities to, put nasty messages about Putin on them or to deface them in other ways, you're disclosing to him where the vulnerabilities are that others, CIA, and a foreign intelligence, MI6, Mossad, whatever, um, could be using for other purposes. The fuel tanks in Russia, where fuel pumps in some places were defaced, that's nice. But if the CIA had the capability to shut those fuel pumps off, that would have done a lot more if they were able to still do that. So again, part of the calculation when you talk about 0 days is, when do you use them, when do you disclose them, and what do you use them for? And there's no single strategy, because they're not necessarily always discovered by the same people. There may have been 0 days discovered by intelligence agencies that were also discovered by criminals. This concept came up when Enigma was cracked during World War II. A similar type of thing. The Allies, the British and the others, had to figure out what they were going to do with it. Are they going to start acting on every message they intercept, and then the Germans would know that, hey, something must be doing with our encryption? Or will they use it, selectively only on the major ones, which could lead to Allied soldiers getting killed and civilians getting killed by not acting on certain information, but yet provide a much better strategic value, over time? And they chose the latter. These are the complex issues that are now facing us, every day in the cyber world.
I remember I'm blanking on the name, but it was a major, it was like the big crypto based ransomware that went out in like early 2018 that used the 0 day exploit that the CIA was initially using for years or something to that extent. And it was such a widespread, mostly on older Windows machines, but it reached such a wide um potential vector of victims, because it was such a open vulnerability, and it's been around for such a long time that it's funny that the CIA was using it for a long time for their own efforts, and then later on this nefarious actor came in to use that same exploit. So it's definitely a I mean, a lot of exploits can be mixed bags.
Right, and a very mixed bag also. Like, does the CIA tell the White House? Do they tell the Pentagon? Do they tell state governments? Right? Do they tell the election people dealing with election systems? You tell enough people and it's going to leak. So, where do you draw the line if you're trying to use it and yet at the same time want to protect your own folks? So these are complex issues.
Definitely. Um, let's see. We can. use that as a I guess jumping off point to talk a bit about hardware risks. So we're talking mostly, it seems like, software right now, but as far as like hardware goes, there's the potential for much deeper root access security threats and having issues go undetected much longer because the actual the physical uh, layout of the device or the way in which it's structured just causes the opportunity for someone who developed it in such a way to exploit the devices themselves. And that's obviously an issue with um, hardware developed in China being used in enterprises. A lot of hubbub from the U.S. government about not using Chinese-based hardware because of those risks that are posed by hardware-based exploits. When it comes to the software versus hardware issues and exploits, which one do you see as being a bigger potential threat that needs to be addressed as far as enterprises? Should they be worried more about software, or should they be more worried about hardware?
I mean, asking whether they should be worried more about hardware or software is somewhat misleading, because a major software problem or a major hardware problem can both be catastrophic. It's almost like asking, is it better for me to stick the fork into the electric outlet with my left hand or my right hand? It doesn't really matter which, you may say, well, I'm a righty, so it's worse with my right hand, but you certainly don't want to do it with your left hand either. Here's the issue. We've spent a lot of time dealing with software, and a lot of people focus on software. There's been far less than necessary focus on hardware. I mean, let's be blunt about it. You gave the example of the US government. US government says don't use certain Chinese products, right? Because there's security risks. The government of China may be involved. They may have access to put things in the supply chain that could, spy. There may be backdoors in it, etc. Okay, great. That means that the US government has made a hardware requirement on its own, some of its own entities. Okay, how do you detect that? Okay, you've got 10,000 computers in the environment. How do you know? Right? So people are relying on the brands, but I mean, do you know what's inside your laptop? You know who the suppliers were for those boards? You buy 1,000 laptops from any manufacturer, they're not all going to have the same boards, even if it's the same brand manufacturer. They may have gotten them from different suppliers at different times because of, especially now with shortages and things like that. The reality is that most organizations do not have a clue what hardware they have. They know they bought X devices with a certain brand label on the outside, but they don't know what's in the box. Think about that for a minute. If there's a vulnerability, whether intentionally put there or not intentionally put there, in a piece of hardware, and you have no idea what you actually have in the box, you're a sitting duck, right? This is a big, big problem. And a lot of organizations have attempted to address this as a software problem. Okay, if there's Chinese hardware spying on me, so I'll see it doing anomalous activity. Yeah, but the government didn't say don't let Chinese hardware spy on you. It said don't put the hardware in. It doesn't matter if it's spying on you. Maybe it's not spying on you now, and they're going to exploit it 3 years from now. But people are looking for the activity when the issue isn't the activity, it's the hardware. That has to be addressed as a hardware problem. And this is an area, it's not more dangerous in terms of repercussions. It's more dangerous because we're not addressing it. And as you said, stuff put in at the hardware level, that's the foundation of the building. If you have a bad foundation, it doesn't matter how many, beautiful floors you build above it, you've got a problem. And the reality is we're not really addressing this sufficiently today. I mean, it's something I've spoken about for many years, specifically related to China. We have a big problem that we're relying on a supply chain from an entity that we know wants to spy on us, on private business, on individuals, and on government. And we're paying to put their equipment into our infrastructure, right? We're paying them to put the potential spy equipment into our infrastructure, and that's a real issue. So they're both, software is important, hardware is important, but we are right now doing more on software than hardware, and I think that's going to bite us. And it's not, by the way, it's not just a matter of Chinese hardware. it's vulnerable hardware. I mean, it happens to be most of the stuff's made in China, but it doesn't have to be a government issue, right? It could be someone went on eBay and bought something for $5, a camera for $5 when the stuff that's available in the store is $50, but this one's shipped in, from China in 6 weeks, no brand, no security, puts that camera in the infrastructure. Who knows what happens? It gets
Keylogger
hacked,
or something. Yeah.
or it gets
Could be
hacked and
anything.
becomes a launching point in the infrastructure. There's so many issues that come up because we have a global supply chain that's completely unregulated, essentially.
Definitely an issue. So with that, I mean, both hardware and software can be kind of handled by SIEM efforts. Is there a good starting point? I mean, we talked about what to focus on, but is there a good starting point if enterprise feels like they're maybe not up to par, or they haven't implemented to the degree that they're interested in? Is there a direction that you suggest starting from?
Well, you need to know what you have, and you need technology to manage what you have. You need to know what's out there. So that's hardware and software. Um, you can't really secure something if you don't know what you have. I mean, besides the fact that you could have something there that doesn't belong there that's a problem, how are you going to know what you need to keep up to date? How are you going to know what vulnerabilities affect you when they're discussed if you don't know what you have? And again, it's not a matter of malware that's active now or Chinese hardware or whatever hardware that right now is doing something bad on the network, right? We don't, when someone goes, think about the physical world. When someone, goes and has a colonoscopy and they found a polyp and they say, all right, we got to remove it. They're not removing it because it's active cancer now killing you. It's because it's eventually going to become potentially problematic, right? Why would we say wait we're not going to detect any rogue hardware and we're not going to do anything until after it's doing something bad? We don't want to do anything about the malware until after it's activated and is actually trying to encrypt our stuff or damage our stuff. You can't do that. Don't wait for the poisonous uh, you know uh, entity to start leaking the poison. If you know that it's there, you got to get rid of it. So you got to manage. You got to manage, your software. You got to manage your hardware. You got to keep it up to date. You got to do it in an organized fashion. The reality is that 25 years ago, information security in many organizations was people winged it, right? The networking people would, do the patching, or the IT department did the patching, and networking would make sure the infrastructure was secure or whatever. You can't wing it today. Hackers are not winging it. They've got professional tools. So it's got to be organized. You got to have an inventory. You got to know what you need to do. You have to know how to prioritize your task, because you're not going to get everything done that you want to. And so a lot of it is about planning and prioritization. And then the flip side is you got to deal with the human issue, as we spoke about at the beginning. If you're not dealing with the users and they think that there's no risk, it's not going to matter what you do technologically, because they're going to undermine it all. So you've got to make sure that you've created an atmosphere where people believe that they and the organization are potential targets. If you've done that, you're still fighting a very dangerous enemy, but you're in a much better place than many others.
Yeah, it's it's uphill battle that's ever growing. It seems like there's ever growing complexity in the software and the devices themselves, and the knowledge of the people, the direction of the companies with which people are operating under. So there's just so many directions to take security, while also just everyday life inundates us with so much information and so much data, and it just can definitely be a bit overwhelming for the individual, and most likely overwhelming for the C-suite, trying to, like, how do we handle all this? So it seems like there's much to be there's a large gap to be closed, with which we're filling over time with efforts that you're making, and other companies are trying to make the case that security is important, and it isn't just a passive thing. You have to actively work towards securing and maintaining security focused mindsets. But I can just I can foresee just an ever expanding, horizon that comes with it, more technology, more expansion, more complexities, just ever expanding in front of us. So it's definitely a growing concern. Where do you see the future of cybersecurity um expanding into? Is there a direction that you would like to see beyond just education and active engagement? Is there a more widespread and accessible, like, default that people can approach?
Sure. It's a great question, and I think there's multiple parts to the answer. One of the reasons that cybersecurity is such a big challenge in terms of education is that it's not something that we learned from our elders, right? Everybody who's watching this recording has learned from somebody at some point not to play with fire, because humans, since they discovered fire, have taught their children, grandchildren, students, what have you, don't play with it. It's dangerous. Everybody who's watching this at some point was told by somebody, don't run into the street without looking, because humans have known that could be dangerous, whether it be by car or horse or camel, whatever it may be. You just don't do it because there's been danger. But nobody who's an adult who's watching this was told by any elder, hey, be careful what you post on social media when they were a child, because it didn't exist, right? Today's cybersecurity problems are not things that we could have learned about a generation or two ago. And so part of the problem is that the typical way that people are educated about dealing with major dangers has not worked for cybersecurity because of the constant change and the newness. In terms of what has to change, I think that is one of the areas that has to change. Cybersecurity needs to be taught in schools, starting with little kids, the same way we teach them don't take candy from strangers. Don't click the link when a stranger sends you something for free candy. It's the same thing. Okay. We need to really educate from a young age that these are real things that have real repercussions. Remember, these are digital natives. They're using devices from a young age. That's issue number one. Issue number two is we have a liability problem going on. Nobody would tolerate if they bought a car and the brakes worked 80% of the time. Nobody would tolerate that on most kinds of products. In fact, nearly all products, if they failed at the rate that technology often fails when it comes out in initial versions, would totally not be tolerated. I mean, it would be, you'd have lawsuits. But yet somehow we've become accustomed to the fact that there's no problem with computer systems coming out with, tons of serious vulnerabilities. And the reason for that is everybody rushes things out. People want new features, and they're willing to take those products. And the market has dictated that they're willing to buy products that may not be fully secure because they rather have the features than pay more and wait extra time until things are fixed security wise. So we have patching and we have all those kinds of things. The problem is, as long as we have an attitude like that, and I'm not saying things will be perfect, there'll always be repairs, just like there are recalls and fixes on other things. But the extent to which we tolerate vulnerabilities in the technology systems that we buy, we would never tolerate in most of our products. And what that means is, as technologies improve and affect more and more areas of our life, we're tolerating vulnerabilities in more and more systems. And that's a problem. That's an attitude problem. Um, I don't know what's going to shift that, but the reality is, if people can put out healthcare systems that are completely vulnerable to leaking health records, and people accept that, or have weak password requirements and people accept that, so then that's going to become an issue, and it's the fault of the market for accepting that. So eventually people have to have demands for appropriate security, and that may take time. As I said, I think education is going to be a big component of that. I think a lot of people today have the frustration, they feel, hey, everything's leaked already anyway, what's the difference? And that's not the case. But if we educate people, and they've grown up accustomed to certain kinds of security as being basic or security concepts, and then they see a system that doesn't have that, they may complain, and that may be an improvement over what we have. So I think those are two important areas of change. The other is artificial intelligence. Today, hacking is humans versus computers, with human defenders managing cyber. That's going to change at some point in the future, and probably not as far away as many people think. Most cyber attacks will be AI fighting, AI defending. So AI attacker, AI defender. And that will be very interesting to watch. And it's not that far off, at least to some extent, because computers can learn how to attack things much better than we can at some point. And it will be interesting.
And
Very
it would
interesting.
be a mistake to anthropomorphize that process where it's not just two AIs coming to blows and hitting each other. It's a iterative process of just trying every vector of approach to try and attack a source, and then having AI defenders who are always trying to iterate and find out
Right, and they're
its
all learning as they go. So
yeah.
during this back and forth, each AI is learning about the other one and learning how to, spy versus spy, keep going up above. And that's going to be quite interesting, because that can happen, a million times a second when you're talking about AIs doing things, as opposed to humans that are taking a little bit longer to learn things. That'll be one very fascinating area. I think quantum will be interesting as quantum computers come out. It's a different kind of issue that's going to cause a lot of our encryption today to become, let's call it vulnerable, if not worthless. We'll have a period of time to adjust to it, but I suspect that there may be bigger problems than people anticipate, sooner than people anticipate, and we may not know about them. Governments may already have capabilities that are way beyond what we think they have. Nobody knows for sure, but is one of the reasons that some governments have tolerated the existence of Bitcoin and all the money laundering that goes on it and all that, because they have a better understanding of
Can
what's really
already
going
reverse
on there.
engineer it with the computing power of quantum,
Found a
being able to
vulnerability.
just boom,
Right,
we're
either broke
already
it with
through.
quantum, found a vulnerability in the implementation. Are the ones operating it at no sound? Who knows? Okay, but they're not going to tell us, right? So we don't really know. We know where Google stands. We know where IBM stands with quantum. We don't really know where various governments stand, where China stands, where the US stands. We think we know, but we don't really know. And so these are other areas that could potentially impact cyber if it comes out, for example, that any party is way ahead of where we think they are, and all of today's asymmetric encryption is potential, not all, but a vast majority is potentially vulnerable because they could factor prime numbers instantly. Well, then we have an issue, like a big issue, like every transaction, every signature, and it's not just the data going on now. It means that anything from the past could be forged.
Yeah, definitely sense just the aspect of relying on these reliable systems using these complicated methods, but the complication is very much just has an underlying process it follows that quantum can just exponentially break through, and that's definitely
We
concerned.
rely on certain statements, individual statements, and belief in those statements being true, almost as axioms, for almost all our security. And one of them is it takes a very, very long time, whatever you want to define that to factor very large prime numbers, right? To find the largest, I mean, you understand what I'm saying. It just, excuse me, not to factor, to take two very large prime numbers and then to, multiply out and then create another prime and then to reverse that process.
Yeah.
It's very hard and time consuming, but with a quantum computer, this may not be the case. And, factorization and things like that, if we assume certain things and we base our encryption and our signatures and our, transactional security and our email security on those things, and somebody actually has a way around it, so then we don't have signatures, we don't have email security, we don't have transaction security. And it's not just what exists today, it's every backup, it's everything. So there could be some big issues coming down the line with quantum. We
We'll
may
see when
find
we
out
cross
in,
that road.
well, what I'm saying is we may cross that road and find out that we crossed it a lot earlier than we thought.
Yeah,
And that
we're
could
already
create
in a
serious issues.
0 day situation potentially, where it's been exploited for a while, and it's just a matter of
I hope
yeah,
not, but
yeah.
we could find that out potentially. And
With the go ahead.
at some point, we may find that out, even if not now. It could be that, whenever we do act, it may be too late, and we may
Mm.
never even know. Right? Imagine the Chinese government reached it a year before anybody knew, and never disclosed it, and it never leaked. We wouldn't know what happened. Right? They would just have information that we didn't know they had.
It's an inflection point, or kind of like a singularity, where anything beyond the event horizon is just kind of this unknowable mass of information. With
Right,
the
except that it affects the whole universe, because it
yeah.
means anything that was stored can also be undone.
Hmm. Yeah, with you're talking about like just the storage aspect of information. Quantum can
If
kind
you
of
if
just
you think about every transaction we do on the web that we rely on encryption for security, if someone recorded all of that and then had a mechanism 2 years from now to break the encryption,
there
they
you
may
go. You
not be
got
able
whole
to go in and make the transactions, but they can certainly see what was in them, or all
and
the
form a
encrypted
network.
emails.
Yeah, get little diagrams
Talking
and
about
whatnot's going.
right, and talking about Chinese networking equipment, these may be some of the concerns that exist.
So it's gonna I guess not switch topics, but kind of something that came up when you're talking about the AI versus AI is kind of the idea that I've seen a couple spots. Self-sovereign ID is an approach to digital identity that gives individuals control of their digital identities. So it's like three layers, where it's entities, identities, and then attributes and identifiers. And so it's kind of creating this buffer between users and the systems that they interact with. So I was just extrapolating that and asking whether you see AI as participating in this identification process and making it I guess easier for users to verify their ID, and having systems have an easier time of matching that ID to their attributes and identifiers and system use.
So I think when it comes to AI and user authentication and user authorization, we're going to see AI make a huge mess, because it's really not that hard to impersonate people and to impersonate their identity if you have a tremendous amount of knowledge, which is what AIs have, and the ability to apply that knowledge very quickly. So I actually worry that AIs are going to make the authentication problem a lot harder to deal with, rather than a lot easier. I could be wrong, but that's my suspicion, at least in the near term.
That's good to know, especially with I don't know, that just it seems there's both the public side and then there's the corporate side, where I can see, based off of your answer, just two kinds of exponentially growing issues, where it's both on the personal and the corporate. Just definitely an issue that will probably get out of hand before it gets easily graspable. um
If you think about it like this, right? How do humans authenticate each other? If I mean, you're talking to me, right? And right, if we then met up in New York City tomorrow and you saw me, how would you know that it's me? So your brain, without you consciously thinking about that, is looking at me, what I look like, what my voice sounds like, etc. Doing lots and lots of analysis.
It's holistic in a
If
way.
it's simplistic, but at the same time, there's a lot going on,
Sorry,
right?
holistic. It
Oh,
kind of,
sorry,
we see
holistic.
the,
Yes,
yeah, we see the whole picture and then check the details, but we don't check the details first. We start with this kind of checks all the
right,
boxes and then yeah.
exactly. So here's the issue. Right now, when computers authenticate people using biometrics, etc., they're doing really the opposite, right? They're looking at specific details and then putting together the whole picture. With powerful AIs that can do what we do, but much faster and much better, that it could change, right? And the AI could be doing effectively, even if at a technology level, it's really doing it from the bottom up. It could effectively function like a human, just much faster, on that holistic approach, as you said. Which also means that if an AI can do that, it could potentially learn how to impersonate a person. And that's part of the issue. And we've seen it with deep fakes and things like that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Definitely. Well, thank you for your time. Did you have any other suggestions or anything else you'd like to discuss before we wrap up?
That's pretty much it. Other than saying to you that I'm actually not on this. This is an avatar done by an AI, and
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sitting. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding with you. But the reality is, at some point, we will reach that level where an avatar could do this, right? It could study me, how I speak, what I say, all my emails for the last X number of years, all my presentations for the X number of years, and learn how to do a good job. We may not be there soon, but it's going to happen. And when it does happen, this is going to be a big issue, not just in terms of cybersecurity, but in terms of societal norms, what's acceptable, what's not, who owns the rights to such AIs. If a person passes away, does the family have the right to have the person continue giving presentations and say things they never said? All of these issues will have to be addressed, but not for now. So thank you very much for having me. It's a great conversation, and look forward to speaking again in the future.
Thank you, Joseph. And did you have any should people follow up by going anywhere in particular? Is there any suggestions that you have for
So
that?
you can reach me on my website, which is josephsteinberg.com, or you can enter the letters js.tc in a web browser, lowercase, josephsteinberg.totallycandid, which is the name of my column. Just like everybody else, I like to use the short stuff because people don't like to actually type the full name of a URL many times. So js.tc, any web browser, and you'll get me. And on social media, I'm Joseph Steinberg on most major platforms.
Beautiful. Thank you for your time, Joseph, and
All right, thank you.
we'll see you later.